Speak live now to Mark Regev, Senior Advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister. He joins us from Tel Aviv. Mr. Regev, thank you for making the time for us. We always appreciate it. Let's begin first, if I may, with the prospect of an agreement to release these hostages. The Washington Post has reported it's imminent. Your Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that nothing is confirmed yet. And in the last few hours, one of your colleagues, Michael Herzog, the ambassador to the United States, says he's hopeful of something in the coming days. What can you tell us?
Well, I think as we increase the military pressure on Hamas, and our ground forces are doing that as we speak, that is increasing the chances of a release of hostages. Hamas is a brutal terrorist organization. We saw that not only in the violence that they committed against innocent civilians on October 7th and in the thousands of missiles they fired at Israeli cities, but we see that in the fact that they took these hostages in the first place, including out of the 240, some 32 children, including babies and infants. What sort of people kidnap babies and infants? So we know who we're dealing with. They're not going to release hostages because they suddenly become humanitarians. They're going to do it if they're under great pressure. And the military pressure they are receiving now from the Israel Defense Forces, I believe, can help expedite the release of the hostages, because we've said, as you know, the only way to get a temporary ceasefire is to have a hostage release, and Hamas knows that. If they want us to take a pause in the fighting, to start hitting them hard, they must release hostages.
Well, on the military pressures that you mentioned, I think many people who watch around the world and read the reports of what's going on, they appreciate Israel's motives to secure the release of the hostages who, as you mentioned, were taken in this attack on October the 7th. But they question some of the methods, including targeting areas around hospitals. I mentioned earlier on the statement from the UN Secretary General describing as staggering and unacceptable what appears to be an Israeli strike on 2 UN schools. Is Israel going about this the right way?
I believe we're going about it the only way. I wish it was possible to send a letter to the Secretary General of the United Nations and ask him to demilitarize Gaza, disarm Hamas and release all the hostages, and it would be over with that. But that's clearly not a realistic option. We have to send our forces into combat, and we have to fight, first of all, to end Hamas's reign of terror in Gaza, and also to get our hostages back. If there was another alternative, please tell me. We're not aware that there is one.
On the topic of this Hamas control centre, which your government says is underneath the Al-Shifa hospital, you spoke to the BBC the other day. You said there were miles and miles of tunnels underneath the hospital. We have seen small bits of footage and still photos released by the Israeli military. When are you going to be in a position to release more evidence that substantiates the Israeli claims of a Hamas command and control centre?
Well, we've released preliminary evidence, as you've said, and that is obviously shows the beginnings, but I expect shortly, maybe in the coming hours or days, we'll have much more. Excuse me, it all depends on the combat situation on the ground. Obviously, one doesn't go into tunnels uncarefully. One must be very reticent, because there are issues with booby traps and with other things that Hamas will have left for our forces. But it's only a matter of time. And I'd remind you, it's not just Israel that says there's an underground military complex immediately beneath the hospital. There is, of course, the Americans. Their intelligence has said so in parallel to ours. And it's been said both by the Pentagon and the White House. And I think if one wants to speak really honestly, the people of the area who've worked in the hospital know full well that there is a Hamas military fortification and structure underneath the hospital. They just can't say so to Western press, because they know they will face violent retribution from Hamas that doesn't appreciate people speaking out of turn.
Well, I appreciate the point you're saying that about other intelligence agencies supporting Israel's claim. On the point of medics that you mentioned, and again, I accept your point when it comes to people talking within Gaza, which is controlled by Hamas. I interviewed a British medic about this time yesterday who has spent a considerable amount of time in Gaza. He said he's never seen any evidence of the hospital being run by Hamas militia. He said this contention by the IDF is, and I use his words here, utterly fanciful from his perspective. He did concede he has no idea what's going on underneath the hospital, but he said he has walked every inch of that hospital and he sees no evidence that he believes that it's being used by Hamas. How would you respond to that?
I would respond by saying the following. I mean, the fact that the hospital is governed by Hamas is the director of the hospital was chosen by Hamas. He's a Hamas appointee. And the fact that we've already found inside the hospital ammunition, vests, explosives, and so forth, he obviously didn't see that. Maybe he didn't want to see that, or they were hidden from him. But that's a sideshow. The most important thing is the military structure underneath the hospital. He, of course, said he has not been down there, so he can't see it. But I believe, as I say, in the next hours or in the next days, we will be showing conclusive evidence. And once again, if the idea that there's an underground military complex underneath the hospital is somehow a secret, it's one of the worst kept secrets in Gaza City. It's common knowledge to the people of Gaza.
Mr. Regev, Israel has previously encouraged civilians to move to the south for their safety. It's now encouraging people to move further west. We're talking about 1.5 million people being encouraged to go into an area which is around 14 square kilometres for their safety. Is that a reasonable request? Why is it not possible to just guarantee their safety in the south as a whole, around areas like, for example, Khan Yunis?
I wish it was possible, but unfortunately in Khan Yunis, like in Gaza City, you have important Hamas fortifications. The rockets are fired into Israel in their hundreds from that immediate area. And we can't dismantle the Hamas military machine without going to places like Khan Yunis. So I know it's difficult for people who've already fled their homes to once again move. I understand that. My father was a refugee. I know what it is to move in war. It's not easy. I've heard it firsthand at home over the dinner table. But let's be clear, it's better to move than to get caught up in the crossfire. That's the bottom line. We don't want to see innocent people hurt in the fighting between Israel and Hamas, and we're urging people to leave. Now, we know it's not easy, but surely it's preferable than staying in a combat zone and possibly getting harmed. It's better to move, and I believe as people move to the suggested area to the west of Khan Yunis, you'll see the international agencies, aid agencies, getting their act together, providing tents and medicine and a field hospital, and the facilities will be there. It's only a matter of time. Please move out of a combat zone. I don't want these people hurt.
You say it will enable aid agencies to get their act together. The aid agencies would say they are trying to get their act together, but they're not getting the support they need from Israel, whether it's communications being shut down, whether it's fuel not being allowed in, food and medicines and other supplies also facing difficulties getting in. Is Israel doing enough to support these humanitarian organisations in their efforts?
Well, first of all, this area is in proximity to the Rafah crossing, which is open, and that means the aid is coming in. It can go directly to the area of safety. At the same time, Israel has placed no restrictions whatsoever on water, food, medicine coming in. We've gone up to now 100 trucks a day. We're hopeful to be able to double that sometime soon. We're ready for a major effort to support these people. Now we know that this is the safe area. This is the place where people can be. And we have to make a maximum effort. We're willing to do our part. We hope the aid agencies and others will make their effort as well. We have to safeguard these people until the conflict is over.
The goal of Israel in this conflict is twofold. It is to secure the release of the hostages, and as you mentioned also, it is to eradicate Hamas. Now, Hamas has existed since the late 1980s, and pretty much since day one, its goal has been to see the end of the state of Israel. Do you think, after decades of conflict with Hamas, this is a reasonable and realistic possibility that you will achieve your goal this time?
I think it's unrealistic to think we can end Hamas as an idea. But what we can do is end Hamas's political and military control over the Gaza Strip. That is possible and that is feasible. I'll give you an example, though. When the German chancellor was here, he talked about Hamas being the new Nazis. So are there still Nazis in Germany? Of course there are still Nazis in Germany in 2023. But do they control the German government? Do they control the German army? They do not. They're out of power. And that's the model we have for Gaza. When this is over, Gaza will be demilitarized and Gaza will be de-radicalized. And ultimately, the end of Hamas rule in Gaza is not only good for Israelis who don't have to live in fear of terrorists crossing the border in the middle of the night and butchering our children, but it's also good for the people of Gaza who deserve better than this terrorist regime that has been in power for 16 years. And what has it brought the people of Gaza? only bloodshed and suffering and poverty.
Mr. Regev, on the international front, France, Germany, the US, the UK have all voiced their concerns over some of the Israeli military activity. And I mentioned that statement from the UN Secretary General earlier on. Are you concerned that Israel is losing the support of some of its key allies in this conflict?
I think if you read the piece that the President of the United States has written in the Washington Post today, you'll see that he is committed, like we are, to Israel's right to act in its self-defense, to eliminate this terrible terrorist organization. If Scholz called them the new Nazis, the president called them sheer evil, and that we can't go back to square one. We can't have some sort of stopgap solution which leaves Hamas in power. We have to eliminate Hamas. But in so doing, we are committed to the rules of war. We're committed to humanitarian support to the civilian population of Gaza. And we believe we can do so hand in hand, that in parallel to our relentless campaign against Hamas's military machine, we will be working with the international community to do as best we can to safeguard the civilians of Gaza and to make sure they receive expeditiously humanitarian support.
Okay. Mark Regev, Senior Advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister. Mr. Regev, thank you very much for making the time for us.
My pleasure.